appreciate all of you going ahead and filing your returns early so you could be here with us this morning. April 15th, tax day, makes many of us feel sick, but this is simply the sickest tax day in Tennessee history. Never in Tennessee history have a General Assembly and a governor caused Tennesseans to get so little for our federal taxes. And never in Tennessee history have so many working families paid so much to get so little. Tennesseans today will file tax returns showing we're paying the IRS $47 billion. But the radical Republican legislators and the governor are making sure Tennesseans don't get our share of returns from our returns, or making sure those billions are not returned to Tennessee. Here's a check today, dated today, payable on the taxpayers of Tennessee to anywhere but Tennessee. $1.4 billion, $1.4 billion. It's for health care for anywhere but Tennessee. Signed by Governor Bill Haslam and the radical Republican legislature. This is what Tennessee would have received so that more than 300,000 Tennesseans in our state would have received health care. There's another check here. Paid by the United States of America to 300,000 Tennesseans, $1.4 billion again, also April 15th, for health insurance for working families, signed by the American people, drawn on the federal taxpayers, and it has been stamped stop payment. It's been stamped stop payment by the radical Republicans in the legislature and the government. This isn't an economic decision, it is a political decision. It's a decision made by the radical Republicans to send Tennessee's tax dollars out of state while refusing to take the federal funds to alleviate the suffering and address the health care needs of more than 300,000 Tennesseans. Now, the radical Republicans want to blame Washington for refusing to let Republicans deprive Tennesseans of constitutional rights like due process, and for refusing to let Republicans violate federal laws, and for refusing to give more money to insure fewer people so insurance companies can profit more. The radical Republicans want to blame Washington, but it's not Washington refusing to accept the federal funds and depriving 300,000 working Tennesseans and their children of health insurance and health care. It's the radical Republicans in Tennessee. It's not Washington who's to blame if rural hospitals close. It's the radical Republicans in Tennessee. It's not Washington to blame because Tennessee's politicians refuse the federal funds and another Tennessean or two die every week because of the lack of health care. It's the radical Republicans in Tennessee. It's not Washington who's to blame for $1.4 billion of Tennessee's taxpayer dollars going to pay for health care anywhere but Tennessee. It's the radical Republicans in Tennessee. And that's what makes this the sickest tax day in Tennessee history. To the radical Republicans now in Nashville, I call on you to man up, stand up, and own up. The blood of you deny health care and who die without health insurance will be on your hands. The one or two a week who will die untreated because you denied them life-saving health care will die because you refused to let Tennessee's federal tax dollars come home. The legislature's awfully busy this week trying to adjourn and go home, and perhaps that's the one good thing that all Tennesseans can agree upon. But before they go, they ought to leave no child behind, and they sure should not leave 300,000 of God's children behind. They ought to heed the admonition of Deuteronomy 30. They ought to choose life. And they ought to accept the federal funds that Tennesseans have paid so that those dollars come home instead of going to New York and California and anywhere but Tennessee. I'll be glad to respond to questions.
What would the Democratic Party have done differently?
Would have accepted the funds, would have accepted the $1.4 million that we don't have to pay one thin dime for for the next 3 years. In this budget year, it's only a question, will we accept $1.4 billion or won't we? We don't have to provide a nickel, a match. All we have to do is just accept the money and provide health insurance for more than 300,000 working families, workers and their families.
Eventually, we would have to provide some type of match, looking forward. You are basically saying that's good investment beyond, even though we would have to match, good investment.
The analysis is uncontroverted that it'll cost us over the life, if you look out 10 years, we'd have to pay about $1 for every $29 we receive from the federal government, more than $29 we receive from the federal government. And quite frankly, in a state with a 9.75% sales tax, all over the state, just the extra sales tax revenues collected alone, is not to mention all the savings by people having health insurance and not having to have uncompensated care. That alone would mean it's a far profit. If you don't even care about whether people live or die, the legislature ought to approve this so for the boost to the economy and for the tax revenues that would be collected. If you don't care about rural hospitals and whether they stay open, the legislature ought to accept the money and the governor ought to get the money just for the revenues that would be generated. It won't cost us money, it will save us money. Not just in the first 3 years, but in years going forward. And there's no obligation on Tennessee to continue ad infinitum. I was here when we cut back on receiving federal funding. You can do it. You have to man up or woman up and have enough courage to make a hard vote. But we did it when we had to before, and we can do it if we have to again. But for now, in this budget year, the only question is, will we accept the $1.4 billion or won't we? And the consequences for Tennesseans are, the New England Journal of Medicine study that was released last year in the summer says if you look at the Medicaid expansion, the difference it makes, and you apply those numbers to Tennessee, those 300,000, it means each week between 1 and 2 people will die if we do not accept the money. And those are people who are either the workers or members of the working people's families. Any other questions? Thank you all for coming out.
I have